Hey there, friends and comrades. Today I want to talk about population and some of the ways it intersects with other issues. So last time I talked about one of the ways that sustainability is impossible within a capitalist market due to the outside pressures on every producer to grow their market share every single year, or be driven out of business. And like to sort of recap on that, basically if you produce the same amount of stuff every year, but your competitors like produce more stuff, then the price of the stuff you produce will go down, and eventually you won't be producing enough to support yourself. And hence, like you're forced to grow just in order to stay in the same place. So one of the reasons people say that capitalism needs growth to continue. Um, but that is only like one of the ways that the unsustainability of growth and like the political ramifications of that. So today I'm going to talk about like the elephant in the room of growth arguments and sustainability arguments, and that's like population. And so why is it the elephant in the room? The reason is because there are those who like refuse to talk about population, and like those who talk about almost nothing else. And I hope by the end of the video you'll see why I'm closer to like the first camp than the second. Um, if you watch the last video, you should see already why population growth is obviously a threat to any limited biosphere. As we saw, when there were only like 2 doubling times away from hitting the absolute limits, there's still like 3/4 of all of the resources left still to go, and so it can be sort of misleading how close you are to hitting the buffers, as it were. And then when you remember as well that like in our grandparents' lifetimes, we've had like 2 complete doubling times of the world population. And then you look at like the state of the global ecology with like dying seas and exhausted soil and an atmosphere in deep trouble, then these population arguments can seem sort of very obviously correct. So what's the response? Well, basically, I consider the vast majority of the population arguments that I come across to be racist ones. Um, I have like a 4-sentence counter, which I think speaks for itself. 1. There's 7 billion people on the planet. 1 billion of those people use the vast majority of the resources. That 1 billion also has the lowest birth rate. And that 1 billion, led mostly by rich white men, wants to say that the problem of like world unsustainability is poor women of color having too many babies. So like I find if you express those 4 sentences, you can convert almost like any young person away from a focus on population. Basically, the point is that population arguments used in the global north are mostly a distraction rather than an attempt at seeking solutions. Like of all of like the ecological multipliers, like organizations like Population Matters decide to point the finger at like the one multiplier which rich white men are not so much to blame for. That is like having lots of babies. And so like within a liberal framework where everyone is equal, because we're using what I'd consider to be a false, like universal we, population growth arguments can be a method of derailing. But what can we, as people who aren't necessarily liberals, learn from the intersections of population growth and sustainability? Well, I think they have a cultural dimension. In the global north, our like life trajectories, if you will, are meant to follow a predictable pattern. Like you get educated, get a job, find a partner, marry them, move out, have like 2.4 bubbers by the age of 25. They then grow up, leave home, and start the process all over again. And in the meantime, you get a house by the beach and live out your lives. And as we all know, like this is like total bollocks, right? Like total bullshit. And like our generation online enjoys mercilessly mocking the older generations for pretending that it's possible for us. But let's pretend it was possible for a second. What would it actually mean for materialists who care about like the actual conditions that people live in and are forced to work in, and not like the bullshit ideals that society teaches us to want? So is this idea of marrying in your 20s and having your own children and your own house, is that really normal? I don't think it is. Like, those of you, and those of us who aren't from like white affluent backgrounds, will probably be thinking it's pretty normal for your grandparents to be living, if not in the same house, or at least very close by. But for us in the minority world, we're expected to leave home straight after university, and then very soon start our own setup, with all the stuff that our parents had all over again. Maybe you see where I'm going with this. We are expected within 25 years or so to have established a whole new family, thus like doubling our total consumption. That's like a new house, 2 new cars, double the food, water, heating, etc., etc. And so, like, going back to the last video, sort of a little bit of maths, what rate of growth is required to sustain this? Well, if 7% rate of growth is like a 10-year doubling time, and 3.5% is half of 7 is a 20-year doubling time, and therefore half again, 1.75% rate of growth is a 40-year doubling time, then 25 years has to be somewhere between like 3%, 3.5%, and 1.75%. It's got to be something like 3%. You could look it up online. And since the financial crash in 2008, the idea that any of the Western nations could achieve and maintain a 3% rate of growth, like, it's been laughable. I mean, I think America's very happy right now with its 2% rate of growth. And yet, everything about how we are told to enjoy our life and what the determinants of success are seems like predicated on that level of growth, that sort of 25-year cycles where every 25 years you can have your own house and everything you want. And then every time we as young people fail to achieve the goals that society sets for us, it's considered a personal failing, right? Because under the liberal the liberal framework, like, we're all individuals who are totally equal, so any failing has to be entirely off our own back. And those failings tend to be said to be like, you didn't get a good enough education, you didn't work hard enough, you're lazy, you did too many drugs, or whatever it is, right? And so that's considered a personal failing, even though the very economy, right, unsustainable though it is, does not provide the material growth necessary to maintain these sort of 25-year cycles. And even all of this is under the assumption that the resources are being evenly distributed. So if we had exactly the right percentage of growth, they would have to be evenly distributed for us all to be maintaining this way of life, right? But if you've heard any of like Bernie Sanders' stump speeches, for instance, you've heard him say that something like 90% of all new income goes to the top 1%, or even the top 1/10 of 1%, right? It's nothing like an even distribution. And so, like, I guess the reason I'm talking about this is I want everyone to be fully clear that not only is the system rigged, but even if it weren't, it can't succeed at what it tells us it wants to provide. And so, like, I'm going to leave that to the side and totally switch gears to something else in population, because I want to talk about sort of the animal liberationist take on the subject, which I learned from Ronnie Lee from the Animal Liberation Front. He's one of the founders in the 1960s. It is true that, like, the vast majority of carnist arguments against population are like racist ones, because consumption is like so unevenly distributed among the human population. Like, if I have a child in the UK, a woman in Cambodia would have to have something like 260 children for our children to consume the same amount of energy on a day-to-day basis. But however, when we're talking about human supremacy, that's the mindset that the natural world exists for human consumption, then actually population is an issue. Like, we destroyed the forests of Europe well before capitalism and white supremacy were invented. Homo sapiens wiped out many, many, many of the large land mammals of Asia, the Americas, or Turtle Island, long before modern civilizations. The slow growth of human populations over millennia did huge amounts of damage long before we could blame our economic systems. So, like, human imperialism, which is like the taking of land, the control of land on the basis of human supremacy, is something that must be tackled alongside capitalism and white supremacy. And population is the factor that seems to have pushed it. Like, as always, as intersectionalists, we should like look at who is the group most affected by the arguments that we make. And in that sense, the non-human world does seem to be right at the bottom of the pile. So basically, like any white carnist making population arguments is probably reproducing white supremacy. But I think there is probably an argument to be made that by animal liberationists that's harder to brush aside. I'd love really to hear your thoughts about that, because I'm sure there's more development that can be done in that sort of argument. Thanks for listening. Let me know what videos you'd like me to make next, and ciao ciao. Mwah.